It's great that you all join us for this wonderful talk. We'll be starting now.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please take your seats as we start the session?
Here we have Runas, who is a WordPress plugin developer with over 10 years of experience working with WordPress. He has built a number of free and premium plugins, and today he will tell you what he has learned from trying multiple ways of running a number of WordPress websites from a single installation. Pros and cons. So give him a big round of applause, please.
Hey, so hello Belfast. It's my first time here. I'm very happy that you invited me here. So as it told, my name is Arunas, and I am probably the most outspoken WordPress enthusiast in the whole of Baltic countries. I've done a lot of speaking in WordCamps across Scandinavian and Baltic states. I've done a little bit of core contribution. I'm also a co-host of a Lithuanian WordPress podcast. So as you can see, I like to talk a lot. And I said I have to keep to schedule today, so we'll see how that goes. I'm also a WordPress plugin developer. I've developed a number of plugins, and now my bills are being paid by Kayak, where I'm a software engineer and I run their content platform. And in my non-existing free time, I also do some fun tools for WordPress developers. So please try them out. Those slides will be live and the links are all clickable here, so you can go to those things. So you always start with a single WordPress site, right? And building it and creating it and starting it is one thing, but it's a one-time thing. You've done it. You put it up, it's there, and that's it, isn't it? No, it isn't, because you always have to maintain it. And maintaining a WordPress site is quite a job. You have to do a lot of things. You have to keep things up to date. You have to keep the core up to date. You have to keep plugins and themes up to date. You have to keep your custom code up to date. There are users that you have to keep track of, content that you have to keep track of, especially if you do things like changing themes or things like that, uploads and things like that. So that's for one site. But you have 10 sites, so everything gets multiplied by 10. And when you are doing 10 sites, it's still kind of manageable. So you can still go in, whenever there is a WordPress update, you go in and update all 10 of them. Whenever there is a plugin update, you can still remember which sites do you have that on and update that. And when you change something in your own code, you can also go in and change things. But then you go further, so let's say 100 sites, then things tend to start to be complicated. Because now you have 100 cores to update, and you have more than 1,000 plugins to look after. And so you get the picture, right? So when I was talking about this with some friends, and one of them is part of a hosting company in Estonia, and he said, so where do you get those numbers about numbers of plugins and stuff like that? So I didn't really do a lot of research into that, but that's the feeling I have from what I've done and how many plugins I do have in my sites and things like that. So I said, okay, but I could do some stats for you. So I said, yeah, I'd like to see those. So do you like to see some of those as well? Yeah. So this is from 30,000 WordPress sites. So what they have is they have WordPress core versions from 1.5.1 up to 5.2.3. So this was like a couple weeks ago, so the 0.4 hasn't come up yet. But only 20%, less than 20% were on the latest versions at that point. And I said, so how do you run all those old versions? So he said, oh yeah, well those are clients who have something old also and they want to run that. And we could kick them out, but we kind of are happy to take their money. So we still have that in some servers that we have separated from everything else so things don't break too much. And they also have almost 13 plugins per site. So this site, in my experience, I thought it would be quite a bit more, like 20 or something. But yeah, you can't argue with numbers here. But another thing is, in 30,000 sites, they had 22,000 different plugins installed. So as you can see, there isn't that much overlap in plugins that you have if you have different sites. I think the most popular one is on 40% of the sites. And after most popular 20 or so, the numbers go down really, really fast. And then you have all kinds of different things running there. And if you take into account plugin name and version combinations, you have 58,000 of those. So as you can see, people are not that good at keeping up to date. So the managing part doesn't go so well. So thanks for this for Zone EE and Peter, who gave me this. Yeah, so as I said, whenever you have more sites to run, like 100 or something, you could still do things like have a dedicated person who just does just that, because at 100 sites, keeping them up to date and managed correctly, that will be a full-time job for a person. And maybe somebody is happy to do that, but not me. I like to code things and I like to create new things. So if I have many sites, I like to optimize things somehow. So when you have a problem with WordPress, the first thing that you think of usually is there should be a plugin for that. And there is. Yeah, so if you go to stage one, you look into things like main WP, manage WP, Jetpack manage, infinite WP, and iTheme sync. So those are either main WP is a plugin, others are services. But what they allow for you to do is you can install a plugin on your site and then have a dashboard somewhere, either on your site or on the servers, where you can go in and do things like housekeeping tasks, updating things, and maybe editing some options and things like that, moving content around in a single dashboard for all your sites. And that's good while things are great, while things are running. So if you did an update, nothing broke, then that's okay. If things broke, yeah, you have a problem. Another thing that I have noticed when I tried to do this, and I tried to do this like 4 or 5 years ago, it was, it's nice when you have 10, 20 sites on a dashboard, 30 maybe, but if you go much more over 50, those things tend to get a little bit clunky and not so easy to manage anymore. And depending on the service you choose, it can start to get pricey a little bit, because with every site you add, you might need to pay some fee for that. Okay, so the next thing that I looked into was multisite. How many of you know what a multisite is? Okay, so a few of you. For others, it's a mode that you can enable on WordPress, and it will allow you to run a lot of sites on a single WordPress install. It was a separate project at the beginning, but since 3.0, so quite a while ago, it was merged into the core. It's part of WordPress core at the moment. And it's not that hard to do. You don't need to be a developer to do that. You just don't have to be afraid to write a couple of codes and a couple lines of code into wp-config file. So for best results, you should start with a fresh site. Just do a WordPress install, go to wconfig.php, and define a constant there that says allow multisite. Once you do that in your WP admin under tools, you'll have a new menu option that will say network setup. You go there and you follow the instructions that involve copying a couple more things into your wp-config file. And once you're done with that, you'll have a new option in WP admin that says sites, and you will be able to create new and new and new and new of them. I have a link here that has more details into that. And this looked like a very good thing for me when I first saw it. The thing I was going to use that for was for my development sites. So it was okay, so I put everything in here. I have a single code base. So all my custom things that I use for clients, I have them all there. I can enable if I need anything. And it was nice. It is good when you host everything on a single platform, because with management plugins you can do that with sites that are distributed across all different hosting providers and things. This has to be on a single server, basically. And data is stored in a single database. And all the sites then share the single code base, so that means they can use the same plugins, the same themes, and the thing that is good and bad at the same time, they all use a single user stable. So the thing that I found quite hard of it is that if you have a plugin and you want to enable it, you can do it two ways. One of them is you can enable it on a single site, or you can enable it on all of them. So if you have 100, 100, 1, or nothing. Or you have to go like to every single one, enable one by one, one by one, one by one. And another drawback that I found quite soon after starting using this is when I was done with the first site that I've done, and I needed to move it out to my client server. And at that time, there was no tools for that, basically, so you had to do a database dump and fish things out, which is especially complicated with user stable. Now we have some CLI package tools where you can write a comment and it'll pull things out for you, but it's still a bit complicated. And if you try to run a multi-site in production, you should probably do that for things that for which a shared user stable is more of a good thing than a drawback. So if you have a network of sites where you have a brand with different locales and things like that, where the same people go in and edit, or you have the same clients that go to different shops that you own, then that works. But you wouldn't probably want for somebody to go to like a tire shop, buy a tire register, and then go into a different store that sells, I don't know, adult goods or something, and to find out that you already have a user there. Why do you have a user here, honey? That's not a good thing, right? Yeah. So another thing, after that, you can go one more layer of complexity up. It's called a multi-network. So instead of having a single multi-site, you can have a network of them in a single install. So basically what it does, it can group your sites that you have into networks. So you can, which works really nicely if you have, for example, a company that has many brands. So you can have one network for one brand, another network of sites for another brand, and so on and so on. And then you can do things like activate a plugin or enable a theme for just that group of sites. So you can say, I want this plugin enabled on this brand, like 10 sites, or I want this plugin enabled on another brand that has 20 sites in it. It's also not so difficult to enable and to use. There is a plugin for that. You just take a multi-site WordPress install that plugin, enable it, and it will give you a new menu option in VP Admin that says networks. So you create a new network, then you create sites in that network, and then you go from there. So as I said, it gives you a little bit more flexibility, but it's still a single database. And if you run many sites, that database can run into gigabytes of data. And it's still single user stable. So the same as with multi-site, it's a bit complicated if you run very, very, very different sites on it. And another thing that I've noticed working with multi-network, well, a lot of that functionality is still in WordPress core, but that's the very edges of WordPress core. So that's places people have never been before, or things like that. So what happens, you can run into bugs that have cobwebs around them. So there was this like a few months back, I was looking into doing things like switching between sites and then uploading a file and then putting it somewhere and going back to the site I was already originally on. And what would happen, I would get a Frankenstein of a URL. So I had the old site URL, the path for the new site, and yeah. So and the bad thing, it still actually works. So if you like to view that image in a content or something, it still looks okay, but the URL is all different. So it's different brand or something, and that's not good for SEO and for anything for that matter. So I said, oh, I found a new bug. I'm going to report it. I'm going to maybe even fix that. And I went into Track, and there is a bug report for it. It's 7 years old. But the problem with bugs like that is that there are like 20 people in the world who care about that, so you have to fix things yourself there. Yeah. Okay, so if you want to go to a complete extremity of that, of keeping things in one place, you can go with containers and Docker. So you can put every site on a different container. And spinning up a container is also not a hard thing. It is very, very basic parts. It just needs several commands in command line. So you have Docker and Docker Compose installed. So you go to a directory, you create a config file, and you start it up. And that's it. And the config file isn't that complicated as well. So what's here, you say, I want to use MySQL database. Here are the credentials. I want to use the latest version of WordPress. And we are using the same database I described above. That's basically it. And rinse and repeat that for every site. So the very good thing about that is that sites are now completely separated from each other. So if you are making changes and if you mess something up, you only mess that one site up. You don't break everything, because in multi-network, multi-site, if you made a change, something bad in a plugin that's enabled everywhere, everything goes down. Or if you made a change to WP config, like a simple mistype or something, everything goes down. With this, everything is separate. So it can be easily split, moved to a different server, whatever. Those are different things. But then you don't have any kind of connection between that. So if you need to do things like most popular posts across all the sites that I have, then this is really, really complicated here. And of course, if you're using Docker, there will be some resource overhead. So you'll need a little bit more resources than you would need if you're just running a single Apache instance, like with multi-site or multi-network. And then, if you are feeling adventurous, as I am from time to time, you can go into even more different things. So you can go in and try to run a lot of WordPresses from a single WordPress code base without doing a multi-site. All it takes basically are several lines in VP config. But then what you can do is you can have the same WordPress core, but define different databases to use and different assets that sites use. And again, not so much to do. So first of all, you do identification of domain which you are accessing from. Of course, you have to do like sanitization, validation to make sure that this is something that you're expecting to get. So, and then just include a different VP config file for every site. And then you have two constants. One is to define the path to your content directory, and another one to define URL to your content directory. And it works quite nice. I've been running instances of that for about 5 years now, but for my own hobby projects, not for something very important. Because again, making changes here, you can break things and they break on everything. Another thing with this setup, that means all your plugins and themes that you have, they are separate for each site that you have. So if you have custom code or a plugin that you use everywhere, you have a lot of copies of it. You can solve that on the server side with using things like symlinks and link them together into different sites. But that's like you solve one problem but create another, you solve one problem but create another, and it tends to get fragile if you use those. So what I've learned over these years, that there is no single best solution for this kind of problem. For different projects, you will go one of those different ways probably. If you're an agency that has client sites all across the different hosting providers, you might want to use the management plugin or management Saas for that. If you have lots of sites of your own, multi-site or multi-network might be the solution for you, especially if having single users database and maybe even a single user session would be an advantage for you. So you log into one of your sites, and after a user comes to a different site, they're already logged in, so they can do things and have less friction about it. So this can be a good thing. As for Docker and other setups, they are for more specialized things that you do, and they are definitely when you are running your own environment and your own servers. But there is one thing that helps with pretty much all of this, and it is called a WP CLI. How many of you know what that is? Okay, way not enough. Okay, so from where I'm standing, this is the best thing that has been invented since sliced bread. So WP CLI is an official command line tool that lets you do a lot of things with the WordPress install, pretty much anything with the WordPress install, from the terminal, from the command line. There is an official handbook for it. There is a link here, but now some examples for what you can do. It works best on Linux or Mac. You can run it on a Windows machine as well, but Windows just pretends that they have a good terminal. They don't really. So basically, just a couple of lines to get it installed, and then you can use basically WP anything when you are in the directory where you have a WordPress installed. So you can do things like read what configurations are there, modify them. You can update core and change things, work with posts, options, users, whatever. So I made a list here, and I have epsilon afterwards, because this is not all. You can do even more things that are not on this slide still. So for example, updating WordPress. You just update the files and update the database. And if you have a multi-site or network, you just add a network to that. That's it. If you need to install any of WordPress, that's also 3 lines. You just download it. You can even tell which locale you want and which version you want if you're feeling adventurous. Then you say you want to create a configuration with some database credentials. And the third one is just all the basic info that you would have to enter into a form in the famous 5-minute install. So this is more like 30 seconds. I really, really love this part. So have you ever had trouble moving site from staging into production where the domain name changes? And you have to do replacements into the database? And everything gets broken if you try to do something on the dump and the serialized data gets corrupted. So with this, no such problems anymore. You just say, what do you want to replace into what? It will go through all of your database, and if the data is serialized, it will unserialize it and serialize it back. You can even do things like regular expressions to replace things and things like that. If you do use regular expressions, it might be quite slow, especially on a big database, but it's still worth it because these are things that you could never do by hand. And another thing that I find quite useful when you have a lot of different environments that you run your sites on is that WP CLI can SSH into other instances of WordPress that you have all across the internet. So just define how to SSH into, and it will run that command on the remote computer and show you a result in your terminal. So if you have sites on 20 different hosting providers, so you just write a big file, run it, and everything goes. So you make a coffee, come back, everything's updated. Or if it's not, you can see where errors were coming from. The only thing that you have to have for that is your hosting provider has to give you SSH access, and most of them do nowadays if they respect themselves. And they have to have WP CLI enabled there, which most of them also do nowadays. All right, that's it for me. Any questions?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that talk. I have a few questions for you,
Yeah.
but first I would like to check if there's anyone wanting to ask a question. Okay.
Yep.
Do you use any testing tools? If you're using CLI to do updates, how do you know that they're not breaking the size? Have you got any other tools that you're using?
So you can because this is a bash script. You can use anything. You can run npm tests or anything you want together with that. It depends on the setup. For some things we do have tests. For some things we cowboy a little bit, but it depends on the importance of stuff.
All right, another question?
If you're familiar with using the full database on the server, is there any advantage to using CLI rather than just going into the database to do search and replace?
Because you don't have to go anywhere. Just on your desktop run it, and that's it.
You've got to install it on in the first place. I'm not familiar with using the WP CLI, that's all.
Yeah, so it's 4 lines of code. You do it once, and you have it for all the eternity.
You've got to put it in on a site before you change it.
No, so you don't have to put it on a site. Your hosting provider has to have it. Most of them do nowadays. So you don't have to put anything on your site. It's there as a tool for you. It's the same way as you go in and do change directory or copy a file. Then you can. It's a similar command that you use.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? Yes, gentleman over there.
I have in my company, I have a number of clients which each one of them has the website hosted with WP Engine.
Yeah?
Yeah, with WP Engine, but they have each one in a different install.
Yes.
Right? So basically, it happens that I don't have a monitoring tool when a team needs to be updated, Ruby needs to be updated, when a PHP version changes and needs to be updated. Do you know any tool that can get all of those data and put it together and says, okay, that website needs to be updated, that needs to be updated?
I don't know of a tool, but WP CLI would be a good thing to build that tool with, because you could do things like going into all your different instances and getting, for example, information on plugins that have updates, or if a WordPress version is outdated there and things like that. So you could then gather it all in and have some sort of dashboard where it shows everything in a single place for you.
I think.
You can use things like ManageWP to monitor, but then use the CLI to do the updates. One of the tools on the
Yeah, that's also
site,
possible. Yeah.
You can just use for monitoring, but then not actually do the updates using those tools.
Any other question?
No, that was going to be
Okay.
my answer as well. It was going to be, we use another one that could go on that list that we use is iControl.wp. It's
Yep.
from a Belfast-based company that does multi-WordPress
Yep.
management. So we use it to actually, they provided us with an API endpoint as well, so we pull all that information in to our dashboard, so we're able to see without going into theirs on each of the projects which ones need core updates or which ones need plugin updates, or they also do a vulnerability scanner every day, so we can pull into from their system if there's any known vulnerabilities from the WP vulnerability database as well. So yeah,
How do they call it again?
iControl.wp.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that
Awesome.
one.
They're very, very good.
Another question? Yes?
I was just thinking, you say different project request different solution.
Yeah.
There's so many websites, and would you not break down those websites into different industries, and then you can develop a tutorial to answer each specific industry's questions? Because I have questions same as he has it, but we in a different industry, and there's not enough support to answer all those questions. So would you be interested in developing a template for your audience to answer their questions to boost your business as your for sales driven oriented?
Okay. That would be an interesting project, but that's not something I would be willing to take up because I really don't have free time for that.
Yeah, but that's why all these websites, it's a support, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Every website struggle is a support. There's not enough knowledge, people, not enough, even people have enough knowledge, they would have not enough time to support individual customer requests. And they were dying. I need a drive me mad, this would have not figured out for me. So if at any time could have given me tips at the right time, at the right thing, speak the question, answer on, I would have paid for it. I mean, I know that's the end of the day you're dreaming for sales. The end of the day you run business as a business. So if you don't get money for you answering the question, then what is the point in doing it?
Giving back to community.
Well, it's a wonderful idea. Maybe someone else will take
Yeah.
it and create a business that does that.
I would just the content and video production to answer those questions because I have my own website and I manage it, update it myself. I wouldn't have enough knowledge because things are changing all the time. So I'd say break down in a different industry, segment, and then different client meet different supporter. That'd be a good match.
Yeah, consider it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think we have time for 2 more questions.
So you had some.
Yeah, one was answered already. Another was about multi-network WordPress sites. I was wondering what would be the use case for it.
Yeah.
Example.
So, for example, if you like in a company that has many different brands, and those brands have different locales or locations or something, and you have, for example, one brand is in 10 countries, so you have 10 sites for those countries, and another one has 5 other countries, so another brand would have 5 more sites.
Multilingual websites.
Yeah, so it could be on multi-language, but sometimes when business logic is more than just multi-language, but you have different things for those different markets. Okay. Yeah, so if you have 5 sites that are on one brand, 10 sites on another brand, so
that's one multi-site.
Like one network in one multi-site, another multi-site, but they're still on the same platform, on the same everything.
Using the same code base.
Same code base, but you can enable like some plugins only on one network, but not the other, and so you have a little bit more granular control over the things.
Interesting. Yeah, wonderful. Any other questions before we finish? Okay, before we go, just information that before the end of lunch, we are going to have a group picture outside this building. There's a DCU sign on the right-hand side. When you exit this building, turn to the right. There's a big sign, and we are going to have a group picture in front of the sign 1:15. So we would like to invite all of you to go there and join us for the group picture. And now